organization in Mason City that raised almost $20 million in order to restore what had originally been the City National Bank and Hotel, designed by Wright and originally opened in Mason City in 1910. The restoration is called the Historic Parkian, and we're very proud of it. In the 10 years that we've been open, we have had visitors from over 50 different countries. We literally have visitors from every state in the union almost every year. Have had some wonderful write-ups about it in various magazines, and have won a number of awards for this restoration project. I have been on the board way back since the fundraising stage. As I said, it was a $20 million project. I won't go into how we financed that. That would take me a half an hour, and you want to see the hotel. So let's get started. What they asked Frank for when he came to Mason City was a replacement for the City National Bank. It had grown too small, and it was a fully incorporated bank. And when they brought Wright to Mason City, I'm exceptionally proud to say that a woman was president of the bank. Mary Hemsley Adams and her husband, Thomas, had started a small bank in 1872, and it had grown, and they had another building, and now they needed yet another. So they wanted a replacement for the bank. Her son-in-law, J.E.E. Markley, was a member of a law firm, and he and his law partners wanted new office space, and they also felt Mason City needed a new upscale hotel. In addition to that, they thought, well, we'd like some office space to rent out, and we'd like some retail space to rent out. Well, they wanted a mall before there were malls, because they wanted all of these things in it. That might have bothered Wright for a few moments, because he really believed that a building should reflect its use. And so here he has a building with multiple uses, and knowing Wright, it didn't bother him for very long. We all know by now that Frank was arrogant enough to believe that he could do anything. So what he did was design this three-part building that you see here in front of you. The part on your left was the bank, and the bank was 2 stories high. And so you see the first row of windows, the lowest windows with bars across them, those are the top of the banking room. And above that, there was a floor with office space for rent. Now, this is all Prairie School, very low to the ground, natural materials, typical cantilevers as Wright would use, ribbons of windows, flat, low to the ground, appropriate for the prairie. Now, the bank reflected its use. It was a safe place to keep your money. So you notice there's no lower windows, all right, in that 2-story banking area. That's so it would look like a vault, a nice, safe place to keep your money. And those clerestory windows at the top had iron grill work down, there you go, that's the top of the banking room. Those had iron grates over them. So boy, do we look safe here. And so that was the bank portion of it. The law offices were located in the middle, in what Wright called the central waist of the building. The law offices it was sort of an entry area on the ground floor. The law offices were on the second floor. They had their own private balcony. And then there was another office space for rent on top. Now, the bank was 3 steps above grade, so you had to go up to enter the bank. So it was kind of a formidable looking place. On the other hand, it faced the busiest commercial street in Mason City. This side that you're seeing faced the beautiful park right across State Street. And the hotel is very different in its design from the bank. It is at ground level. It has windows. It's much more welcoming. And it is designed so that it has two side wings, a left and a right wing. And that allowed for the building to go back in a U shape so that as many of the hotel room windows as possible would get light in them and have a view of the beautiful park across the street. The lower windows are the lobby, and the lower part of the east and west wings were retail space. And the part that you see that is a cantilevered balcony between the two wings was the ladies' parlor and the ladies' balcony. And in the basement, there was a gentleman's lounge. I mean, it's 1910. We're going to do a little segregation here. Again, you see the cantilever on the roofs and the ribbons of windows and all of the things that were so typical of Wright's design. So while the building appears all as one thing, it's tied together. If you look at the horizontal lines that run across the full part of the building, you can see that it's all beautifully tied together. The roof line, everything. And yet it was considered two separate buildings because the bank owned the bank section and the lawyers owned both their own office section and the hotel itself. So that gives you kind of a good overview of what this is. Wright's own drawing. So this is an overview of what the building looked at. Let's look at a couple different angles now. This is the bank from the view that this side would face the busiest street in Mason City. And you can see that a little closer view of those clerestory windows that mark the top of the two-story banking room. And you can see at the top, there are columns up where you are into the office space that was for rent. Those columns were actually colored Gruby tile because he felt it needed a little added color to the building. Down below, if you look clear over to the left, there is a little bitty one-story section. Clear, oh, right there. There you go. And that section housed the offices for the bank president and the head cashier and the boardroom for the bank. He did that so that the clerestory windows and the windows on the top floor could go all around 3.5 sides of the building and bring in as much light as possible. He didn't like buildings downtown that abutted each other real closely so that it shut out light on probably two sides. You can see the bottom part of it has railings, and you could go to the basement for more retail space. You get a quick little view over there so that you can see where it indents in for the central waist and goes on down to the hotel. This picture was taken very near its original opening in 2010. I think it was 1910. I think it was actually taken in 1911. Another view on the next slide gives you some color to take a look at it and with the cars, and you get the fuller view of how the hotel runs on down the side. The brick is unusual brick on the outside of the building. It is not standard brick. It is, it's not a Roman brick, but it's similar. It's a longer brick than normal. And because it's a longer brick than normal, it makes the building look even lower and more horizontal as you look at it than it would otherwise. It kind of gives an optical illusion that the building is even more horizontal and lower than it is, to keep that real strong Prairie School style. And again, you can see the overhang of the roof all the way across with a cantilevering that he was so proud of. And again, notice that the windows are not set in one room and another room and another room, but the windows are in ribbons as we call them, so that they don't look like separate eyes looking out of a building. If you look at the building on the left, you see probably a window for each of the rooms, very different from what Wright did. Continuing to the next slide, we'll look at the inside of the bank. When you walked in, you have walked up 3 steps to get in, and this is what it looked like as you entered. You can see the clerestory windows up around the top, and those opened so that there could be air circulating into the room. As you came up the front, you see a low wall, brick wall that matches the other brick and set into about, a little above waist high are the teller's cages. And behind the teller's cages, you see an unusual structure in the middle of it. The room is sort of like a box within a box. You have the full box of the room, and then you have the box created with the teller's cages, and you could have walked either on the north or the south side back along there. Now, behind it was this square structure, and at the top of each of the 4 corners of the structure was a light fixture. And at the top of that light fixture was a statue of the Roman god. He was the symbol of prosperity and business, appropriate for a bank. And then behind that, you see the vault. And if we go to the next slide, I think we have a bigger picture of the vault. Well, no, this is a big Mercury statues, I guess. These you can see over here. This is the original structure on your right, and that had all been removed over the years. We'll talk about why here in a little bit, but those had all been removed. And we only knew for sure where one was. One was in the library in Mason City, and they allowed us to use that to have new Mercury statues cast. And we had Wright's drawings for the light fixtures, and so they were recreated. So over on the left-hand side of the slide, you see what they look like now. The Mercuries are identical to the originals. The light fixtures were redone according to Wright's own drawings. So that gives you an idea of how that structure sat in the middle of the room. On the next slide, you see the hotel. And again, you see how much more inviting it looks than the bank. You can see more clearly here the 2 wings, and the wing on the right was usually a restaurant, and the wing on the left was usually, well, at first it was a tobacco shop. The hotel rooms are on the 2nd and 3rd floors. And again, you can see at the top how those windows go on around the wing so that as many of those hotel rooms as possible get the view of the park across the street. You will see too the cantilevered balcony that is there, and the windows that you see behind it are part of what was the beautiful Ladies Parlor. And you can see down here in each side of the entryway, you can see the columns, and we'll get a closer look at those later, that have groovy tile in them that match the groovy tile that's on the pillars on the bank side. The original windows that you see on the upper sides of each wing were designed by Wright, and they were produced in Minneapolis at Anderson Windows, which is still in business today. Looking on at more views of the Parkian, if you go to, there you go, you can see the cafe over on the one side, and the by this time this picture was taken, the tobacco shop was closed, and there was another retail space that was allotted there. This gives you a good view of the west side of the hotel, not the hotel, yeah, of the hotel, going back. So again, you can see the windows on both floors give that good view of the exterior. The next slide shows that it was called the Parkian European. And the European style meant that the rooms were 10 by 10. Now kind of imagine that. A lot of our bathrooms are that big today. And they had shared bathrooms. So you might have a room with a bathroom attached, but it would be shared with the room next door. Or you might have to go to a bathroom down the hall. And that was very much European style. And it was very popular at the time that Wright designed the hotel. And there were many events, popular events that happened at the hotel over these years. You can see the Wartburg College Orchestra. Wartburg College is located probably about 30 miles away from Mason City. And so you see the group there, they were staying at the hotel and performing in town in the early years. On the next slide, you see a disaster, all right? In World War I, farm products had really high value and farmers were making a lot of money. They were buying new equipment and they were getting loans from banks. After the war, the bottom fell out of farm markets completely, and many of them could not repay their loans. And bank after bank, particularly in the Midwest, folded. Huge banking crisis. And one of the banks that went bankrupt was the City National Bank. That portion of the building was sold, and the people who bought it totally remodeled it. They lowered it to street level rather than 2 steps above grade, and they added a second floor. The lower part is, as you can see, retail space with big windows, retail windows showing what's in. They took out the clerestory windows. They added double hung windows on the second floor, which was office space, and the third floor remained office space. They did not change the third floor, thankfully. The windows and the columns and everything remain at the top. But while to those of us who are Wright fans, they ruined it. You know, they absolutely ruined the design of the building. But they did keep that very top section just as it had been, and with a cantilevered roof and the windows and the columns that remain up there at the top. If you'll go to the next slide, there were changes also in the hotel in the early years. Originally, you walked into a lobby and there was a mezzanine balcony that separated the lobby from what was called a Skylight Room in the back. And this is the remains of the Skylight Room. There had originally been art glass panels in that skylight, but they had leaked very early and they were taken out. And this is what remained of that roof. And they opened up the room so that instead of having a separate lobby and a separate skylight room, they had one big room. It's interesting because the newspapers that were published when it opened were so absolutely praiseworthy of that skylight room. It was the dining room. It had this art glass ceiling. It was only 1 story high. Reminded me a lot of how Japanese architecture, you know, has an open section in the middle of a building. And this was kind of that 1 story section in the middle. But this change came as early as 1916. and really only 10 years after it opened. And we are pretty sure that the reason was that the roof leaked, that the skylight structure leaked. And that wouldn't be in the least unusual for Wright. Wright was sort of infamous for leaking roofs. He was an architect and he was not an engineer. And some of the time, his designs did not have the best engineering features that would ensure that they would last. If you look at the next slide, it got remodeled any number of times. You can still see up at the top the remnant of where the skylight was, and it was changed into a bar, a restaurant, many things. At one time in its history, it was in the 1970s, it was a disco, and disco was a very polite name for what it really was. But this one you can tell from their clothing, we are probably into the 30s or 40s. I want you to take a look at the floor, because in every picture you will see of this room, the floor is the same. Let's take a look at the next one. You see again, it got changed and remodeled, but look again, they're the same tile in the floor that were there. Let's go a little further. Now, the hotel continued to decline. One of the things that happened was that a new hotel was built just a few blocks down the street. And it had bigger rooms. It had bathrooms in every room. And the rooms were a lot larger than 10 by 10. And so the hotel declined over the years. It was not very popular and had sort of a seedy reputation as time went by. It was used as apartments at one time, and then ultimately the hotel section was abandoned. The bank section kept functioning as a retail center. But in the early phases of trying out restoration, the job went to a group called the Mason City Foundation. The Mason City Foundation's real job was to build a center that is dedicated to Meredith Willson, one of Mason City's favorite sons. And they opened their center, and they opened the house that Wilson grew up in. And so, the building was abandoned, sat in really bad shape, and the city asked the Mason City Foundation to take over the project. They agreed. The first thing that happened was a whole group of volunteers came in to tear out everything that was not original to the hotel section. And at this time, it was just the hotel that was going to be restored. And there was a lot of discussion about, okay, how are we going to use the building profitably once we get it done? However, the Mason City Foundation got one small loan, but they were not able to raise any more money, and they gave the building back to the city. Fortunately, those volunteers stayed and continued to tear everything out of the hotel section of the building that was non-original. It saved, I can't even begin to guess how much money it saved to have volunteers doing this, because to have had this done professionally would have added just a whole lot of money to the project. So you can see here, one of the rooms that they're working in, this happens to be the west wing, lower floor that had been a restaurant. They hauled out things from the basement, from the upper floors. It was just an enormous undertaking, but we are completely grateful to the volunteers who did that. After the Mason City Foundation pulled out, the city was left with a building and was trying to decide, okay, what next? Well, They even put it on eBay. Imagine that one. That didn't go very well. But what they were looking for was maybe if somebody saw it on eBay, a group would be interested in its restoration. But nothing came of that. And in desperation, the mayor of Mason City put out a call for local citizens that would be interested in forming a group to renovate and restore the hotel section. And that's when Right on the Park was born. It was just a group of local citizens who got together, who were interested in both Wright and in doing something to upgrade downtown Mason City, because this building sits on the major corner. State Street and Federal Avenue are the center of Mason City. And they wanted something there that would be an attraction instead of a building that was possibly going to be torn down. And so the people who were on that board were dedicated and raised that nearly 20 million to keep working on the building. We'll look at further what was happening in the next slide. This is what the building was looking like, okay? Here in the slide on the left, there has been a lot of the non-original material removed. You can see in the middle of the room, you can see where there was a wall. The walls were taken out so that what had been one 10 by 10 room could become 2 rooms. And so that we could end up with better amenities and bigger rooms. Originally, there were 43 rooms in the hotel. Today, there are only 20 in the hotel section. There's 1 in the central waist, and there are 6 on the top floor of the bank. And all of them are big enough and have their own bathrooms and are much, much nicer. Now, with historic preservation rules, everything that is public must be restored as closely as possible to the original. But with things that were not original or that are not open to the public, like the individual bedrooms, you have much more leeway in what you can do. And thus they were able to create 1 room out of what have been 2. Over on the other side, you see the doors to the bedrooms. Most unusual factor. They are louvered doors, and the way they fit together, they can be opened. You can slide each of these open so that in the original, if you opened your bedroom window and you opened the louvers on the door, you could get air circulation into your room. It also shows what was one of our biggest problems. Almost every piece of wood in the hotel had been painted, 99 colors of white. Now there's an exaggeration for you, but many. Every piece of wood had to be stripped, numbered, refinished, and put back into place. The original wood was used almost exclusively. But again, imagine the process, taking out all the molding, taking out all of the doors, the framing around the windows, everything, and stripping it down and resurfacing it, with all that numbering on it to get things back where they belonged. That's a giant jigsaw puzzle. That's almost hard to imagine how they really got that all done. Looking further, I'll go to the next slide. Now, this shows a restored bedroom. Now, this is one of the larger ones. On the second floor of each of the wings, they made the rooms into what are called our 2 suites. And they are they're larger than most of the other rooms. But this still gives you the style of all of the rooms as they were restored. The light fixtures that are here are copies of light fixtures from the Roby House. And I want you to pay special attention to the windows. Remember I told you that the original windows were produced from Wright's designs by Anderson Windows? Well, it happens that Anderson Windows is still in existence. And many of these windows were broken or cracked or gone. And Anderson still had Wright's original design, and they redid all of the windows that we needed. And get this, they donated them back to the project. What a cost saving, what an amazing, amazing thing for them to have done. And again, you see the woodwork, which is all original, and again, which was all stripped and had to be numbered and replaced. Our designers picked some of the things that were Wright's favorite colors. This shade of red is a color that he used frequently. He liked to use earth tones, and so we stuck with those. Every place in the building had the walls bored into to determine their original colors. And, even though they've been painted many times, they do these little bitty bores and they send them off to be analyzed, and they bring back and tell you what the original color was in a wall. And so that was followed throughout the building. In the next slide, you get a close-up of those windows and notice, the grating, and up above there is art glass, colored art glass. You don't see the color very well, but you can kind of see the greens in here. But those are some that were reproduced by Anderson Windows and are a lovely part of the building once again. Continuing on, this was originally the Ladies Parlor. You can see what kind of wreck we have here. Again, all the white paint. The ceiling had been falling in. There was an interesting story about it. At one time, it was an apartment throughout the building. They had made them into apartments. And I met a man who came through on a tour who said, as a junior college student, this was his apartment. And he could open the doors and go out on the balcony and play Frisbee with his friends who were across the street in the park. So some interesting uses over the years. So this is what it looked like. It had glass windows, but here what had been torn out, a lot of these are not still windows. There were only 2 of the original Frank Lloyd Wright designed windows that were left. If you go to the next slide, you see it completed today. Now, we have a wonderful glass restorer in Clear Lake, Iowa, which is just 10 miles away from Mason City. And from the one that we still had that was original, our designers put an ad in the paper to see if anybody else had any parts remaining of the hotel. And someone had one of these doors in their basement and donated it back to the project. The biggest problem they had in sections like this was getting things straight. A 100-year-old building tends to sag. And in this room, for example, the head of the crew doing the restoration said, just throw away your levels and make everything look as straight as you possibly can. But now you can go out onto the balcony. Almost all of the balcony is original. It has 2 big planters on it, and that was never touched. The only thing it needed was new flooring. But this room is, remember, we have a ladies' parlor. Remember those rooms were 10 by 10. Frank did not expect that you would come to Mason City and spend all day in a 10 by 10 room. He expected the ladies would come here to converse, to read, to do their correspondence, whatever. Today, it's there for guests' use, and it's also for rent. And you can't see it, but on either side, there are 2 rooms that were labeled sample rooms. In 1910, there were 5 passenger trains a day coming into Mason City. And a salesman, if he took a room at the hotel, could use those sample rooms to display the things that he had for sale. And so the ladies who were staying at the hotel, and even the local ladies, could come and go shopping in those sample rooms. The floor in this room is original. But of course, the decor is not. But again, the colors are according to what we found in the wall boards. Looking further at more of the place, they had, as I told you, made the main downstairs room into one great big room. Originally, it had a mezzanine to get from the second floor, went from one side to the other without coming downstairs. And the part where this gentleman is standing was part of the Skylight Room. And the part where this gentleman is holding that up was the lobby of the building. And so this is when they took all the original stuff off, they could tell very clearly in the walls, the indentations where the beams had been for the mezzanine. Looking at it closer, I'll go to the next slide. You can see what it looks like completed today. It's very low. It is just about 6'3" or 4" in height. My grandson is 6'3". He feels pretty claustrophobic when he goes into the lobby of the hotel. So you can see the mezzanine is back in place, and the desk is exactly as it was designed by Wright and is back in place. And separating it from the Skylight Room on both sides are these art glass doors. They had been long gone and there was no sign of them anywhere, but they were in Wright's plans. And so it was possible for our glass artisan to reproduce those exactly. There are stairways that go up on this side over here to the second floor, and then a stairway that goes up onto the third. You see the balustrade in here. Those were original, had been painted white. You can see them down behind this cart. And so that was stripped and restored to its original. We'll look at the next slide. This is the art glass that was originally in the ceiling of the Skylight Room. However, this is not the Skylight Room. Nobody knew what had happened to those art glass panels, but the two lawyers, main lawyers who owned the building were Markley and Blythe. And during the restoration, the owner of this home had a Frank Lloyd Wright expert with him. And that expert happened to be lying on the floor of the sunroom meditating. And he looked up and he said, you know, I think those are the originals from the hotel. And they got to investigating and they sent pictures to the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. And lo and behold, they were identified as the originals. And the people who owned the home donated them back to the project. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see that some of them were cracked. Some of them had broken glass. They needed some restoration work. They needed cleaning. And this is John Larson, the art glass artisan at Clear Lake, who did all of our art glass restoration. And here he is working on fixing one of those pieces from the Skylight Room. In the next picture, you can see that we did what Wright failed to do. That skylight had just been open to rain. We built a skylight above the panels, and you can see the structure. Sunlight comes through it, and then the art glass panels would go into this. And so now those art glass panels, when they're replaced, have that protection above them. And if we look at the next slide, you see them in place. Now, occasionally you will see a crack, like right here, okay? As he was restoring them, if there was a crack like this, but the rest of it was very, very much original, he did a very narrow caming to keep the original as much as possible. There were some places that had to be replaced because they were in such bad shape. And he had a hard time finding a glass manufacturer who could come up with the pieces in the color and in kind of the texture that the originals were made. He finally found a company that made them on a machine from their warehouse that was 100 years old. And they made them to be able to replace the things that were broken. But now the Skylight Room is one of the finest features of the building. And you look up through this and it's amazing. We'll look at the next slide and you see it in place. And this is part of the Skylight Room. The original Skylight Room was a restaurant, and it was, the paper printed the menu, full 3-course meal for 50 cents in the original. And it described the places for your intimate dining experience. In the room on each side, there were actually 3 booths. We did not put those back. One of the things that you have to consider is that our hotel has 27 rooms. A 27-room boutique hotel is not self-supporting. And so we needed as many rooms as possible that we could rent out. Now, there's a remarkable feature about this room. It has these columns that match in design the balcony, the outer design. And if you go and look in the main sanctuary at Unity Temple, it has that same design with the 4 pillars that anchor the room, the skylight up above, and their balconies look just like the mezzanine design here. So this is called, this room is called Unity Temple's little sister, but it is just a remarkable room today. You see some art glass windows that are over in here. 2 of those were still there, and a local group paid for having 2 more made so that on the opposite side of the room, the 2 are back again, done by Wright. Everything in the room our designers chose, but part of it just makes me laugh. The furniture that they put in is reproduction stickly. And I think that would have Frank rolling over in his grave. Frank hated stickly. He thought he was far superior furniture designer than Stickley, and was quite angry that people regarded Stickley's furniture as better than his. So, but it was the best reproduction or period furniture. And so they chose to put it in the room. We'll go on to the next slide. Now, remember I told you to keep looking at the floor? Now, in historic restoration, anything that is original that you can keep, you must. All right, if it's a public room. And that Skylight Room and the lobby are public rooms. And so all of this had to be cleaned and made in order to be kept. But I used this picture to show you, if you see the dark lines that run, that's where the booths were that were on each side. Now, I told you we did not replace those booths, but we left the floor so that today we can tell people this is where the booth sat. Now, when the restoration was done, when you work with the tile and they're original, if you replace a broken one with a new one, it has to be obvious. All right, so if you look at the white ones in the middle, do you see those that are a bit brighter white? That's because those are replacements. If you look over on the right side, you will see some darker ones that are of the orange color that, you know, those are new bricks and or tile, and you have to be able to tell. And people come in and they look at our floor and they say, oh, why didn't you fix this floor? And we tell them, we could not. And we want you to know we're very proud of that floor because 80% of it is still original. In the next slide. All right, this is the lobby. This is what the lobby looked like over here on the left side before any work was done on it. Remember I said that it was separated from the Skylight Room with the art glass windows? In the picture on the right, you can see the new ones that were done by art glass artisan, done exactly from Wright's plans, which were very specific. Again, the desk is right where Wright had it, underneath the mezzanine. Now, an interesting part of it is that Wright uses a technique called compression and release. So here you have that, just barely over 6 foot section under the, and under it is the desk. We like to joke that that makes people not bother the clerks for too long because it's so claustrophobic. But in reality, its purpose, when you walk from this low surface back into the Skylight Room, it makes the Skylight Room seem even grander and bigger than it really is. And that's the purpose of compression, this compressed part, and then released into the big part. In the picture on the left, notice the art glass across the top of the display window. By some miracle, that survived 100 years and was still there. It had to be removed to be cleaned. And it also had to be removed to avoid accidents. They were coming in with ladders, they were coming in with all kinds of equipment, and they were afraid those windows might get broken. And so they were removed and went to John Larson's studio to be cleaned. And if we look at the next picture, you can see them putting up the restore, when it's all cleaned up and completed. And for a long time, we thought, okay, Wright's art glass usually symbolizes something. Why is this just so plain looking? Well, keep in mind, there's a wonderful park across the street. And symbolically, it was pointed out to us by a Wright expert. This is the trees across the street. All right, the tops of the trees and the ground. And when you are told that, you think, duh, was really kind of dim of me not to have seen that before. But it was so heavy that it took, these 4 are still there, getting it almost in place. But it took 8 men to take it out and to put it back in and to carry it. And when John Larson was repairing it to turn it over, he had to have practically his whole family come and help in his studio in order to do that. Let's go on. This is the central waist that I told you about. This is where the law offices were, and they had a balcony. And I like to imagine them in 1910. They were some of the movers and shakers in Mason City at that time. And I like to imagine them out there with their cigars, watching what was going on in the busiest part of downtown Mason City to keep track of it all. Here you can also see up in the left corner, part of the column work with the Gruby tile. Unfortunately, one of the owners of the building over the years cleaned the Gruby tile. And part of what makes these special is that they were called fayanced, which is a special treatment begun in Italy. And so they had really removed that outside surface. And as a result, they were not in very good shape when the restoration started. And so they had to be recolored. They're still Gruby tile, but they don't have quite as high a value as they would have had at one time if that original fayancing finish had been left there. So, but this shows you how that indentation works and how they're working on the central waist of the building. Next, this is what is now what the law offices. If you look at the picture on the right, this is what remained of the law reception area. Now, the one part of the building had a different kind of wood than anywhere else. All of the wood in the law offices was what was very expensive mahogany, because both Markley and Blythe owned shares in a South American mahogany company. And so they had that mahogany brought in and used in their own offices. In the rest of the building, they had cheap wood finished to look like the mahogany, but in their offices, it was real. Notice this is one of the offices. This is Blythe's office. And notice how the windows are in his room and how much that reflects the clerestory windows on the outside of the bank. Many details like that are carried in. On the outside of the building, there are light fixtures that have poles that they stand on. But this is a replica of that without the pole. You see again the furniture that was donated by a local family to furnish this, what was the law reception area. And again, poor Frank, it's stickly furniture, but it is original period stickly. So, we kind of like that. Now there were 4 attorneys and 4 offices, but one of them lost his office. Poor Mr. Smith had to give way to an elevator. This section is an elevator today because, you have to have handicap access. And so we did it by putting in a elevator where one of those offices had been. The rugs are all original arts and crafts designs. A couple of them are, what's his name? Just a minute, it just left me, the leader of the arts and crafts movement. A couple of them are his designs reproduced. So, all of this is done in as close to the style of the time period as was possible. In the next picture, you see what they had to do to the exterior of the hotel. The exterior of the hotel had very little change. The roof had sagged considerably and had to have repair work. And here they are retuck pointing. Some of the mortar between the brick was loose or missing. And so they are using these things not only to do the retuck pointing, but to clean the brick as well. The chimney had to be replaced, and you can see the process going on there. In the next slide, you will see a picture from about the 1950s of what the bank building looked like. And now you get some idea of what is it going to take this back to what Wright originally designed. I mean, it's lowered to street level. It's got an extra second floor. What are we going to do here? Let's look at the next slide. All right. This is the way the building looked when the bank was still, in shape and was still being used for retail. Now, we are already working on the hotel, but when the original project came to Wright on the Park, it was just the hotel. And then, miracle of miracles, the bank section of the building came up for sale, and we were able to buy it so we could turn the project in to the whole structure. That was really exciting. It just upped the cost quite a lot, but it also was much more exciting in terms of what we were going to have as a final product. In the next slide, one of the first things that they did was check the foundation of the building to be sure that the bank foundation was still secure. Well, most of it was, except the northeast corner. The rest of it was on bedrock, but the northeast corner was on sand and gravel and clay, and it had deteriorated the foundation so much. They said it was a miracle that that side of the building had never come down. That gave us pause. Here you can see that they have removed the display windows that had been there. They're standing up here on the second floor that had been added, and they're working on that foundation. Next picture. They had to jack up and put in all kinds of support in order to make the new foundation around almost half of the east side and a third of the north side of the building. I don't have a picture that shows even more support systems put up that allowed them to take out the second floor. But they had to support the third floor. And so all these support systems had to go way up. And let me tell you, I think everyone on the board of Wright in the Park held their breath while those support systems were in place, because it looked so precarious. And we kept thinking, oh my God, what happens when it all comes down? Fortunately, it did not all come down and we could breathe again. Next. They raised the floor back to 3 steps above grade. And this is the process of raising that back up. For the original bank building, why put it above grade level? Why have 3 steps to go into it? Well, it was part of Frank's whole plan to make it as professional and vault-like as possible. The hotel you could just walk straight into, no steps to go up, but you had to go up the steps in order to get in to the banking room. And this is the process of putting in the new floor. The next slide. They put in, when they were working on various rooms, they put in new insulation all over. And I include this because the insulation that they used fascinates me. It's all made of recycled denim. You can tell practically by the color, but it is supposed to be a very, very good insulation system. Going on. Now, this is the original picture of the bank. All right, remember all of the bricks, those clerestory windows had been torn out and all of the bricks had been removed to put in those retail windows. So here's the reminder, but remember that very top section, what had become a third floor, was the same. Now, next slide, we wanted to put back in those iron grates that had covered the clerestories. 2 of them remained in the building, but none others. And one day, one of our architectural firm members was driving home to Clear Lake where he lived, and he did a double take when he saw a fence on a balcony that separated a house from the lake at Clear Lake. And he had seen the originals, and he got out, knocked on the door, and went out and looked. And sure enough, these are 12 of the original grills from the bank windows. And they donated them back. People were so generous, and it made such a difference. We were still short about 4 between the one that there was 26. There's 14 here, and we had 2. So that was 16, and the other 10 to make 26 were reproduced. But what a find. Isn't that incredible? What good luck between finding the skylight windows and finding this grill work. We felt pretty fortunate. Next. There was also something else uniquely found. On the 3rd floor, or the top floor, or the upper floor and the upper columns in the main floor, I'm sorry, of the banking room, when they removed all of the covering that had been put over the columns, they couldn't remove the columns because they hold the building up and they're both exterior and interior. But after they had everything stripped off and that had been added over the years, they found iridescent art glass in the mortar joints, in the horizontal mortar joints. That's what our architect Martha is pointing to, is those. And so we knew we wanted to replace those. Two, well, there was a little more cost involved here that we hadn't anticipated, but they weren't all there. Some were broken, some were, not in very good shape. But Martha was finally able to find a company that could reproduce them. And if you look on the right, you will see the columns with glass reproduced and put back into them. Now, the head of our building crew said when he first saw them, his first thought was, damn, they're going to make us do that. And to help you understand his attitude, there are over 4,000 of those teeny tiny, very thin pieces of glass in the mortar joints of those columns. Quite a job. Next. This is the upper floor of the bank, and the windows that you see up there are original. And you see the design in wood that Wright had built into those windows. And this gives you a better view of the upper parts of the columns that Wright had added. This is the finished, restored ones. Now, restoring the brick for all of the bank was quite a job. A lot of hunting was done to find a brick that would even come close to matching the brick of the hotel, because the brick of the hotel was original. We wanted that to stay. So we have to match it for all this new brick to go around what was the banking room. And they did a pretty good job, but they still had to color touch up the bricks in order to get them to match. And you can see how these fit under the cantilevered roof. Now, today, the top floor of the bank, what had been the bank, is 6 hotel rooms. There are 20, as I said, in the actual hotel, 1 in the Central Waste, and then 6 more in the upper floor of the bank. Looking further, this is a nighttime picture of the restored brick all put back in as it had been originally in the bank. And we lit it. So that was not done originally. There were not lights there in Frank's time, but it makes the building show up just beautifully in a nighttime scene. The hotel section shows up nicely because it has those big windows and is all lit up. But we kind of like this nighttime view. Going up again. Now, the outside, when on the outside doors of both the bank and the hotel, there were these light structures and they were gone, but we had detailed drawings of them in Wright's drawings. And it came up accidentally. Our architectural company discovered that one lantern, just one of those sections, was coming up for sale at Sotheby's. And they went on to bid to see if we could get one of them original to put back in the building. They quit bidding at $3,000. The actual one from the building sold for $7,000, which was just a little out of our price range. But we did have them redone from Wright's drawings, and they stand now both at the entrance to the bank and the entrance to the hotel. Continuing. We could not restore the banking room as a bank. Again, remember that we need to have sources of income. We lease it, we don't operate it. We lease it to a hotel operator, but this is what was the banking room. And they tried to maintain the feel of Wright, even though it's not identical. If you look in the back over toward the left, you see the Mercury statues and lights. There are 2 of them there, and there were 2 of them at the other end, at the entrance to it. Look at the rugs. The rugs were all designed by our designers, and they are all based on the art glass patterns throughout the building. And this can be used as a dance floor. And they actually have a wooden dance floor that can be brought in and put in over that. Here you can see that one-story section where the offices had been for the head cashier and for the bank president. And you see this art glass that's back here in the corner? That actually is back, but originally it separated the banking room from the offices. And so the art glass formed the walls that would have been in these sections, but we wanted to keep the room more open and we wanted to maintain the style. They were long gone, but their designs were there. And so we were able to have them reproduced, and now they are back into the building. The in this one, the shades are all pulled for whatever the meeting was going to be. They're likely going to have a slideshow or a movie or something that they want it darker. But this is just one of the configurations. They have round tables, they have square tables, they have, this is set up for one kind of meeting, for dances, for weddings, receptions. It's been very, very popular. And when you walk into the room, it really is beautiful, especially if the sun is shining and glittering off the iridescent light, that comes from those pieces in those upper columns. Next. Downstairs, Wright had simply located Gentleman's Lounge. He had designed nothing for it. And in every other room, he showed where the furniture was. He had designed some of the furniture. Everything was very specific. In that basement, nothing, just Gentleman's Lounge, big hole. So our designers were free to do pretty much what they chose. Notice that the floor is again carpet taken from the art glass windows. And the wood bar is very much like the wood that Wright had used to design a buffet upstairs. And the light fixtures again pick up the period, and we call it the 1910 Lounge. And it's a very popular 5 o'clock after work spot. Sometimes it's rented, but pretty popular evening bar. And the reason, well, it's a bar in Mason City where you can actually go and hear each other talk. There's no music, there's no karaoke, there's no loud sports game going on. And a lot of people seem to enjoy that as an alternative to most of the other bars in the town. Adjacent to this room, there is what's called the Billiards Room. It's actually a pool table. But over the years, there was always a billiards room in the building. And this is River City, and we have trouble right here in River City. And it starts with P, and it rhymes with cool. And of course it is pool. And so this is our own little gesture to Meredith Wilson. But you can get the balls from the bartender, and there are cues, and you can go over and play pool should you be interested in doing so in the evening, and people often do. Next slide. All right, this is where they're taking out all of the non-original material from the west wing, first floor. And this we turned into the 1910 Grill, and it is a restaurant. And up here you can see the restored 1910 Grill. Again, all of the wood, the colors, everything is done in a style that would be typical of 1910, and yet have all of the modern amenities that you need in a building. Next. This is the completed building today. All right. So you can see that if you compare it with that original that I showed you, everything on the exterior is literally the same as it was originally. You have the bank building back looking like a vault. You have the central waist. You have the bottom wings with retail space. You have the ladies' parlor and the ladies' balcony. You have those windows that you can go around the hotel rooms so that you can have light and air coming in. The window ribbon down here on the dining room, everything, all the either the original or duplicates of the reproductions of all of Wright's art glass designs are back in it. It still maintains that complete prairie school look. You know, it still has those long brick. It has this long, low look, the cantilevered roofs, everything back as close as possible on the exterior of the building to what it originally looked like. Next slide, please. This is a nighttime view of the hotel part of the completed structure. And again, you see all the lighting, and you can see here these are those light fixtures that were replaced that are like the ones on the front. The art glass across the top, the art glass here, the art glass in the doors of the ladies' parlor. And you can't quite see a good picture in the dark of the art glass in these upper windows, the cantilevered roofs, that U shape. And remember that in the one-story section that's behind the ladies' parlor is the roof to the Skylight Room. And again, that reminds me so much of an enclosed Japanese courtyard, you know, that same look. And we know that Wright was heavily influenced by Japanese architecture. If you'll go to the next slide, please. Now, Wright in the Park is so proud of the things that it has done and accomplished, and especially proud of the result and the number of people who have held events there, who have stayed there. As I said, we have had people there from over 50 different countries. We've been featured in magazines. Now, there was no way I could include every little detail in this slideshow. So by gosh, come and take your own tour, and I think you'll love it. In addition, we give tours of Rock Crest Rock Glen. After Wright left Mason City, people in Mason City wanted more prairie school architecture. And from his Oak Park studio, even though he was not still there were architects working there. And Marion Mahoney and her husband, Griffin, were there, and they came to Mason City, and they developed an idea for a whole residential section of prairie school architecture. And they had a good start on it, but then Griffin won the prize to design the capital of Canberra in Australia and left. But other young architects from the Wright studio came and built. And so there are 7 prairie style buildings that are all in this one residential area. We also have the Stockman House that Wright designed that's right nearby. And we have an architectural interpretive center. And starting this summer, we're going to be offering bike tours. There are other prairie school houses scattered around Mason City. And the bike tours give you maps so that you can do those. We have a website, www.Wright on the Park. We have a shop that's online there where we have some things that are designed from designs by Wright and in his style that are for sale there. Mason City has a lot else to offer as too. And I strongly suggest if you're interested in coming to Mason City, you contact an organization here called Visit Mason City. And they have lots of details about all of the things that are available here for you to enjoy. And
At this, I'm sorry, Pat, we dropped the links in, Lindsay dropped the link in for Right on the Park in the chat. And
okay.
we're running a bit over, and so no, it was so fascinating. I didn't want to interrupt while we were going through the slides, but what a restoration! How much did the restoration cost?
20 million.
Wow, and that all came from donations.
Donations, grants, historic preservation grants, New Markets tax credits, historic tax credits. A lot of different sources.
And how long did it take?
Once we had all of the money in place, would you believe the restoration actually was completed in just over 18 months?
Wow, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Well, I want to thank you so much. This has to have been one of the most thorough and enjoyable Frank Lloyd Wright tours we've had. And we've had, as we told you before we started, we had quite a few of them over the past year plus. So we're very, very grateful for your time. Folks, if you enjoyed this tour, we're actually visiting Unity Temple on Tuesday, May 11th at 2 p.m. I dropped the link to register for that in the chat box. You can also visit our website at jccchicago.org. We'd love to have you join us. These tours just keep getting better and better. So again, Pat, and go ahead.
I am PALS 42 PALS at myomnitel, myomnetel.com in Mason City. And I see there are 14 questions. And if anybody wants, we didn't have time for those. If you'd like to email me and ask me a question, I would be delighted to answer it.
Or you can send us an email at JCC Chicago and we will forward it off to Pat as well. So just respond to the email that you got for the Zoom call. Pat, again, so delighted to have you and really, really thorough and interesting. And we are very, very grateful. Lindsay, thank you for your persistence in helping me get this together. I'm appreciative of that. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. Again, visit our website, jccchicago.org for all of our upcoming programs. Everyone take care and be well.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Bye
Thank
now.
you.